Excuse me, I need a room, please. Yeah. Do you have an office somewhere I can use for a meeting?
We are live.
Okay, thank you so much. We're going to call the meeting for Reimagining Public Safety to order. At this time, we'll have our clerk read the roll.
Somerville.
Aye.
Baylor. Connor.
Aye.
Freeman. Busco. Holland.
Aye.
Hamer. Lombardo.
Aye.
McKittrick.
Aye.
Malik.
Aye.
Mosley. Neal. Amobian.
Present.
Okay, we do have 7 members present, so we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have been really fortunate to have Brandon Combs, who has been a research intern for City Council. He is studying applied politics, his master's in applied politics, actually. Brandon has also interned with a U.S. Senate campaign and has also worked with the Blintz Institute. So we are very fortunate to have had him intern with us. Unfortunately, his internship has or is coming to an end. A part of the research that Brandon has been doing for City Council has been doing research regarding Ring doorbell cameras and community policing. And as his internship is come to an end, part of his internship is to just be able to report out and share with council some of the research that he has done. I will tell you, he's done an amazing job as relates to researching the Ring doorbell cameras. And a lot of that research is going to be very helpful for council when we continue to have conversations about a pilot program regarding Ring doorbell cameras here in Akron. I also want to, before I introduce Brandon, Councilman Malik, do you have any other comments? Councilman Malik was also very instrumental in working with Brandon as well.
Thank you, Madam President. Just want to thank Brandon for his great work over the semester, and also thank the members of APD who helped inform some of what you're going to hear regarding community policing. But really just excited to continue the discussion and appreciate the opportunity to kind of continue to dive deep into some of these things and hopefully have dialogue amongst all of council and move the ball forward. So just excited for Brandon's presentation.
Thank you so much, Councilman Malik. So at this time, we'll actually turn it over to Brandon.
All right. Well, thank you, members of the committee, and for that very lovely introduction. It's nice to finally meet all of you, but unfortunately, my time with council has come to an end. But I'm really happy to report on my findings. So I'm just going to share my screen here. All right. So just to reiterate, thank you again for having me on today just to talk to you about some of the research that I've done. And today I'm just going to be reporting on my findings for community policing. So before I really get into it, I want to discuss why we're even talking about this. Why is community policing so important? And it's important because the police must establish a working, trusting relationship with the public. So we're bringing the police down to the community level. And when we have that, we have that working, trusting relationship, we have equality. And when we have that relationship, that's how we solve problems, and that's how we prevent crime and increase public safety. So just to give an overview of where we're going with this, we're going to start broad, and then we're going to narrow it down to the city of Akron. So we're going to begin by defining what community policing really is. We're going to examine some of the prevailing theoretical models that are out there. Then we'll look at some of the more important and recent academic studies that have been done on non-enforcement interactions. Then we'll look across the country and just examine some of the current tactics that are out there, including substations and bike patrols. And then we will conclude with a connection to and how this research supports their current efforts. So let's start off by defining what is community policing. Well, really, community policing, it's a philosophy that's centered on improving those relationships between the public and the police. And while there's many ways that we can implement community policing, building trust is what remains consistent. It's the main component of all community policing. And the end result we hope with this is that we can prevent crime and increase public safety. So let's begin by talking about some of the theoretical models that are out there. And the first one we have is the COPS model. And this comes from the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, hence COPS. And this was created in 1994 under the US Department of Justice. And this was really the first federal endorsement of community policing. And currently, the COPS office provides grant funding to communities that want to implement their own community policing programs. And the COPS standard has 3 elements: organizational transformation, community partnerships, and problem solving. So organizational transformation just means the police structure is more decentralized. It's a very bottom-up approach. And we're giving officers out in the field more discretion over their geographically based assignments. And this also means that we are civilianizing the police department, which means that certain administrative tasks can be given to civilian employees, and that frees up time for officers to go out in the field and engage with the community. The second element is community partnership. This just means that the police can't do this alone. They have to partner with community groups like schools and faith-based organizations, for example, to increase police accessibility. And the last element is problem solving. So here we're just shifting from a crime response mentality to a more problem-oriented policing strategy. And here we're encouraging officers to be more proactive and creative in identifying solutions. The second theoretical model we have is the President's Task Force. And this was developed back during the Obama administration in 2015. And like the COPS model, it was meant to be a guiding document for how we can institutionalize community policing. And in this document, we have 6 pillars that are meant to be the foundational structure for this. So there has been a lot of research done on the President's Task Force and the recommendations in it. And overall, the research suggests that most of these recommendations are more intuitive. So the first pillar is building trust and legitimacy. And the first concept mentioned here is procedural justice, which just means it's the perception of fair treatment. And research suggests that procedural justice is strongly linked to increased feelings of legitimacy and compliance towards the police. The second pillar is policy and oversight. This just talks about the connection between bias and officers' job performance. And because it's very hard to measure bias, there's little that's empirically known about this relationship. But because perceptions are also important, that's why it's been difficult to test. The third pillar is technology and social media. So in recent years, body cameras and social media have become more prevalent among police departments. And because they vary so much in practice, it's, again, difficult to test. But with these tactics, we can expect that they'll increase transparency. The fourth pillar mentions or talks about community policing and crime reduction. And what this means is that, well, the research suggests that when we implement more concrete tools with community policing in officers training and shift away from more abstract concepts, we see better results. And this actually takes us to the fifth pillar, training and education. And the research here shows that when we just change something small in police training, it's very hard to track how that change affects their overall performance, but generally a small change will result in more general or a positive direction. And the sixth pillar, officer wellness and safety. This is the link between officers' well-being, their personal well-being, and their job performance. In this context, there's really not a clear understanding, but we can make a link with the private sector, like how stress management programs work with job performance, and generally those are positive as well. And the last theoretical model we have is NDP, or neighborhood-driven policing. This is a newer model. It's an idealist model. It really hasn't been implemented anywhere. It's more just it's a concept, really. And it's founded on 3 components that we talked about earlier. It's that the police and the public are equal, and because the community welfare is everybody's responsibility, that's why they need to work together. And also because the police are just members of the public, it should recognize that they are just the ones that give their full-time attention to solving these problems. And the main policing official in an NDP model is a neighborhood beat officer. So this is a very localized structure where one officer is in charge of maybe 1 or 2 neighborhoods, and they're considered the local problem solver. So really this model hasn't been implemented anywhere. It's more conceptual. So now let's shift over to academic studies. This has been studied for several decades, and I just wanted to pick out the ones that were most important to our conversation. In 2002, there was a study that sought to look at what helps improve police image and the public's feelings of safety. And this article in particular found that substations, community meetings, and non-confrontational face-to-face encounters achieve that. Moving forward to a study in 2014, this was a comprehensive meta-analysis, which means they took 37 studies that looked at various community policing tactics across the country and looked at them using several variables. And overall, they found that there was no statistically significant effect on crime, but there were promising results for improving citizens' perceptions of the police. So like academic studies, field experiments seek to measure the impact of community policing tactics. And many of these field experiments look at foot patrols. So one of the earlier studies on foot patrols was in 2009 in Philadelphia, where they just increased foot patrols in hotspots in the city. And this study was important because at first the results are very promising. Disorder crimes were down, violent crimes were down, everything looked good. But they did a follow-up study a few months later, and they found that none of those effects really lasted. So that has prompted more studies in the future. In 2016, the Police Foundation sponsored another foot patrol study where they looked at 5 agencies' approaches to foot patrols. And overall, they found that those foot patrol programs supported relationship building, but again, there was no definitive link to crime prevention. So shifting away for a minute from foot patrols, New Haven, a couple years ago, this study was important because it was the first of its kind in this context to use random sampling. So what they did was they took a map of the city, identified all the hotspots, and they took a random sample of 1,000 households in those hotspots. And then they sent officers to those households where they could just engage in lighthearted conversation. The officers introduced themselves. It was just an easy talk. And then they followed up with surveys to those households. And they found that just a single visit significantly increased positive perceptions of the police. And going back to foot patrols for a minute, a couple years ago in Dayton, they did another foot patrol program where it was a 28-week study where it was an increase of foot patrols in micro-level hotspots, so like street corners, basically. And they found that there was some reduction in disorder crime, but there was really no data for any reduction in violent crime. And this study was important because it highlighted the need for more research on downtown areas. So shifting away from the theoretical and the studies, let's look at what other departments are doing now. So in Camden, New Jersey, around 7 to 8 years ago, this is a unique case because around then, because of budget cuts, they had to completely dismantle their police department. And they rebuilt it with community policing in mind, with the Peace Corps mentality, and they immediately put new officers on foot beats. And last year, they reported that their crime rates were at a 50-year low, and homicides were down 11%. Of course, there are other variables that might be in play here, but it's a unique case that should be looked at. In Charlotte, North Carolina, they're just getting the public involved with what the police are doing. So they have transparency workshops and citizen academy programs as well. Over in Chicago, they have a program called the Reimagining Neighborhood Policing Initiative. And this is really just a program where officers are kept in the same geographical areas, so they get to know the area well. And they partner those officers with community volunteers just to help them get acquainted with the area. This is sort of newer, so we don't have much data on this yet, on its success. In Cuyahoga County in 2014, 2015, they used the COPS grant to create a system called Police Assisted Referral. And in order to tackle their domestic violence program, they just gave officers a simple tool, which was a stack of business cards. So when they went and made a call, they could connect families and youths exposed to violence with mental health resources. And those involved with those interactions felt that their perception of the police significantly improved. So as mentioned briefly before, substations were one of those tactics that we're beginning to see. Substations are just small branches of police stations that are located throughout communities. In Jacksonville, Florida and Cathedral City, Colorado, these are some of the newly built substations within the past year or so. And reports on those just say that they're meant to help the community with small tasks. So they weren't built with crime prevention in mind, but they're just there to increase visibility. And they're not very large. There might be a couple officers on staff at a time, and they're not really responsible for emergency calls. And again, there's no conclusive data here on whether substations prevent crime. And one of the last tactics I'd like to talk about are bike patrols. And the benefits here are generally more perceived than proven. Officers on bike patrols are typically more approachable. Their uniforms arguably are less intimidating than a normal patrol officers. When it comes to job performance, officers might have an advantage on bikes because they can see or hear more than they would in a cruiser. And they might have a stealth advantage too, because they would be unexpected among perpetrators, not really expecting officers on bikes. They're also less costly than a cruiser. A fully equipped one costs around $1,000, and they are more environmentally friendly. So my last point is, how can we connect all this information to APD? So where does APD fit into the picture? Well, their community policing efforts can be thought of as two-pronged. We have the neighborhood response team and community relations. So the neighborhood response team came from the COPS program that Akron had back in the 90s, which was a community policing oriented strategy, basically. So we can think of NRT as COPS 2.0. NRT officers are heavily focused on engaging with the community, getting out, walking, and doing those non-emergency calls. And currently the way it's structured is that there are 10 NRT officers within 4 zones in the city. And this goes back to the organizational transformation element of the COPS model. So you can see the link there. And right now there's a push to add 5 more NRT cops using the 2020 COPS grant. And the other arm of Akron's community policing is the community relations division. So these are the officers that are responsible for public information and organizing these events. So, Safety Town, birthday drive-bys, these are all done by the community relations division. And again, we can make the comparison or the connection to the COPS model because this fits into the community partnerships element. So you can see how it's changed or really stayed the same from the 1990s to now, because it was part of that COPS program. And right now there are 3 officers in community relations. And like NRT, they're also seeking more staffing. So I'd like to reiterate that community policing across APD, it's not just those two sources, it's department wide. They really want to implement this across everything basically. So all officers are required to go through de-escalation, mental health, and TASER training, and these are all beyond state minimum. So again, we can make the connection to the COPS model. This is how we engage in problem solving. And in addition, all officers are encouraged to participate in those events, and when they have time, go out and do foot patrols and just walk the neighborhoods. So just to sum up everything we talked about, what the evidence is showing is that while there might not be a whole lot on crime prevention, there is modest to strong support that these efforts support trust building. So really, trust has inherent value in all of this. And what we can take from that is that when we can make an intuitive link between building trust and then down the line, preventing crime. And because community policing tactics vary so much and it's tailored to each community, that's why we have to get community input. That's why it's vital. And lastly, with the connection to APD, what we're seeing now is that they're on the right track, but they just need more staffing to continue to make Akron a safe place. Thank you very much, everybody, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Brandon, excellent job. Great information. At this time, I want to open up the floor for questions. Are there any council members that have any questions for Brandon? Councilwoman Amobian.
No, I'm unmute. Thank you so much, Brandon, for that. Not only did you provide a nice framework for understanding what's happening in Akron, the information that you shared with us. And I think what you've offered is that there may not be empirical data to support community policing, but the subjective data that I think, believe that will certainly help any organization is building trust in your community with your citizenry, which could lead to a lot of things. You know, sharing information with you. If they know anything about somebody doing some unlawful things, there's that possibility of sharing, because that is one of the real hindrances that we find in many police officers' investigations, is that people would not come forth. And hopefully, if we could get to the point where we have enough officers out there on foot patrol, bicycling, or whatever the case may be, we can develop more of that. The other thing I'd like for you to react to is when they talked about decentralizing geographically. What are they talking about? Substations in various communities or in those hot spots, or what did you learn from that?
So really, when we're talking about decentralizing the structure, it just means that we want to make certain procedures less rigid. So if there's a problem in one area of the town that might not apply everywhere, when officers have more discretion within their area, then they are better tailored to create solutions that are for that specific problem. So it's a bottom-up approach, and we just want it to be less rigid, give officers the freedom to be more, give them the tools to be creative when identifying those solutions. So that's really what we mean when we mean decentralized there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me too. It gives you more opportunities to react to the public that you are dealing with, because different people deal with things differently. The other one you talked about, body cams and social media, when you mentioned that it's the practice of using those, because we have been fortunate to provide all of those tools to our officers in terms of body cams, and they're always upgrading social technology in their vehicles and so forth. And when you talk about the practice, I know one of the things that concerned us over the years is the fact that sometimes there are investigations, and when you start investigating, someone says that the camera wasn't on. How do people address that? Because you would think that the camera will always be on, and I don't know, maybe not always, because I guess you could lose, the you have to recharge them that much more frequently. But certainly if there's any type of interaction with the civilian for any reason, the body cam should start, I would think. But that seems to be one of the challenges that I often hear. Do you have a reaction to that? I don't know, when you talk about in practice.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's why it's so hard to measure their effectiveness. I mean, because when cameras aren't on, that gets into a separate issue. But when they are running, of course, there's even issues with that as well. But when we're talking about, transparency, I mean, that's when body cameras are really effective, because then we can, see what officers are doing. We can see what's going on. So I think there is value there. And when they are rolling, that's where we can maybe measure the effects a little bit better. So.
Sure. And my final question, and it has to do with well-being. I know that officers go through the CIT training, which is a crisis intervention training, because my agency provides that training. I know they go through a lot of tactical training and probably lots of other trainings. But my real concern has to do with the well-being of the officers, and how do we continually monitor that and ensure that we're giving the officers the benefit of mental health training for themselves, stress reduction training, because this has got to be one of the most difficult jobs there is when you're in situations sometimes between life or death, and you have to make some quick decisions. We are fortunate, I think most of our officers in Akron are good people, good officers, and we don't have a whole lot of issues, but we have our share. And I think well-being of the officer sometimes comes to play in some of those situations. I'm not sure if anybody around the country has the good handle on how do you address this and make sure we're putting our officers first, because we want to make sure they get home as safely as they leave the communities that they're working in. So just curious what you learned about that.
Yeah, right. So in my research, I didn't go too much in depth on those specific programs, but I did come across an article that touched on that a little bit. And in it, we talk about people's trust in the police, but what's a little less explored is the police trust in the people. And sometimes there's a disconnect there, because officers might feel like the public doesn't understand their job. And so when you have that lack of communication, it can actually be very, very stressful on officers, because they have to account for people's perceptions of what they're doing. And that, like I said, it can create a lot of stress and anxiety, and it causes them to be maybe less willing to do things that need to be done. So it's a growing area of research. And I think it's absolutely worthwhile, because I think it's really important to understand that link between their well-being and their job performance. And if we can find, what's causing that disconnect, then we can address that appropriately.
Again, thank you so very much for your work. We really appreciate it. Wish you well in your future, whatever it may
Thank
be.
you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Holland?
Thank you, Madam President. Brandon, let me start first by saying what a wonderful presentation. And I'm so sorry that I didn't get an opportunity to work with you. I really appreciate your approach to this complex topic. And obviously you have the right kind of background and the right kind of analytical skills to take a look at this. So thank you for all of that. First, I want to say that Councilwoman Amobian deftly addressed one of my questions, one of my areas of interest, which is about well-being of officers, and I appreciate your response. I think that there's more than a little bit of a straight line connection between that issue and my other question, which you addressed on your final slide, which is that increased staffing appears to play some role, specifically with Akron's police department and how things will go going forward. And I appreciate that you had to cover a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time, but if you would, I'd love to hear what either your research, possibly anecdotal in terms of talking to APD representatives, or your own views, your own opinions about what that increased staffing would be. Are we talking about additional officers? Are we talking about different kinds of personnel? What do you see as being the kinds of additional staffing that could be helpful toward this greater goal?
Yeah, absolutely. So with our talks with APD, we learned that, staffing was a problem department wide, and really these NRT officers are pulled from that bigger pool of patrol officers. So I think, this is just personal opinion. I think that when we increase staffing for, say, NRT, these are officers that are solely dedicated to community policing. I think if you put more staffing into that, then we can maybe achieve something like that NDP model we talked about that was presented, where one officer is in charge of maybe 1 or 2 blocks. And that's highly localized. But the idea I really liked, because, that officer would know everybody on a first name basis. So when you get highly localized like that, and then one officer is just really getting to know one specific area, building those relationships, I think that's where it all happens. So I think, going back to your question, increased staffing will allow them to do that, to get closer to that idealist model.
Thank you for that. Was it your impression that those who are serving as NRT officers enjoy the work, that it's desirable work?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Lombardo?
Thank you, Madam President. Brandon, good job on that presentation. Just wondering again with the last couple slides with increased staffing, and I've kind of lost track here. Do we have an academy going on? Did we just graduate some? I guess, do you have like a number that maybe would fit into the police model that says that we're at the right staff?
With our talks with community relations officers, they want to increase their NRT officers from 10 to eventually 16. So they have that number in mind. However, just because a lot of the funding with the COPS grant has gone towards other efforts, they hadn't really gotten what they needed to increase it to that number. So that's kind of like where they want to go. But in terms of like recent academy graduates, I don't have those numbers, but I can get back to you on that.
Yeah, again, I think we just graduated some, but I just didn't know the difference between the number of graduated and maybe the retirements this year. I don't know if that balanced out, or we went back in the hole, or, we're up 2 or 3, net.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know if you knew that.
No, I don't.
Okay, no problem.
But I can get back to you on that.
That's fine. Thank you, Brandon. Good job. Good luck to you.
Thanks.
Councilman Malik?
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Brandon. Really appreciate the presentation. Just to fill in, I think with staffing, I think part of what we were talking about when we met with APD was that, it's not necessarily that, staffing needs to exceed what's already budgeted. It's that, to your point, Councilman Lombardo, the current amount of folks in patrol is so low because of retirements, because of folks leaving, and because they haven't been able to, graduate a whole number of people, right? And so we're at a point where they're having a hard time filling the shifts they already have. And so things like NRT or community relations don't necessarily get beefed up, because they're kind of, in some way secondary. And so that was, really, it ties into the one comment that I wanted to make, which is that, as we talk about how we create public safety amidst all the craziness going on, I think it's really important that we find ways that all patrol officers can engage in community policing efforts in the work that, NRT isn't just a separate thing, but it's something that each officer is able to do for at least, maybe, one shift a month or a couple shifts a month, because I think that's really important, kind of experience and opportunities to give those officers, whether it's foot patrols, bike patrols that were so beloved to our late colleague, Councilman Swirsky, substations I know many of us have talked about. So I just think that that's really, I think we have to get away from this idea that, community policing is, I know there is an intent to have community policing be the culture, but, programmatically, we have 10 officers and 3 officers who are committed to community police. I think we have to look for more ways to get all 400 and some officers involved in that work.
Thank you, Councilman Malik. Councilwoman Connor?
Let me just say, Brandon, your work was great. We look forward to maybe touching base with you again in the future and watch where you grow. It's going to be fun. As far as NRTs, let me say, we talk all the time about relationships. We hear it in every part of our work, and NRT is where those relationships are built. We build them every ward meeting when they come. They're at all the school events. Our community officers make those one-on-one connections, not only with our adults, but with our kids at the parks and at the school playgrounds. So when we talk about relationships, the more people that can experience the NRT philosophy, the better we're all going to be, just like the school resource team. It's those relationships that are critical to our neighborhoods, and we look forward to continuing. I will say our NRT people up here in Zone 2 are at everything. I mean, they go out of their way to know people's names and greet them and build those relationships, and we are blessed to have them here.
Thank you, Councilwoman Connor. Councilman Fusco?
Thank you, President Somerville. And Brandon, along with everyone else, applaud your efforts, all your hard work in collecting this information, sharing it with us. Thank you for that. Just wanted to mention and I appreciate the comments in reference to the mental health of our officers who are out there every day and in these highly, amazingly stressful situations. We're fortunate to have basically perhaps world-class, perhaps, victim assistance in our community, and they have taken on this challenge of helping out those in law enforcement, those in the fire side of things, also stressful jobs with their Safety Forces Support Center located at the former Red Cross, and maybe we should look at perhaps helping them out even more, because those jobs are just amazingly stressful. On the hiring side and bringing in more, we have many that are hired at a certain time and going to be leaving at this, very soon. This phenomenon is going to happen. We find ourselves, at a truly challenging time whenever the global or the but the national media, and what's gone on the last couple of years, whereas, attracting more police officers is more and more of a challenge. And it's unfortunate the amount of people who apply for these jobs has diminished significantly. And we've got to figure out a way to make that more attractive and to attract more and more folks. And I know we've had a lot of talks about that. But our police department, truly with the body cams, a leader in the United States, one of the first departments out there, partnering with Kent State University, have done just a great job out there. But there's many challenges, and this work that we're doing together, I think council and with the help of Brandon and others like this, the University of Akron, all this, we've got to look for this continuous improvement, and that's what we're doing here. And I applaud all those efforts that we're making, and I can just see that we're gonna make strides to a better place for all of us and in our neighborhoods. Thanks again, Brandon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Busco. Are there any other comments or questions at this time? Seeing and hearing none, again, we just want to thank Brandon. You have done an excellent job. It has been a pleasure to have you working with us at City Council, and we wish you the best of luck in the future. So if there's nothing else coming before this committee, we will adjourn.
Madam Chair, I can see that Councilwoman Amobian just raised her hand.
Okay, Councilwoman Amobian?
Will we have access to these slides?
Yes.
Yes,
Brandon,
they
is
have
that
been emailed
possible?
out.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much for this opportunity. I've really enjoyed working for council and being able to help guide this discussion in the right direction. It's been an honor. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much again, Brandon.
Bye.
Meeting adjourned.
Our next committee of the day will be the Planning and Economic Development Committee at 1 o'clock. Those committee members are Fusco, Kamer, Connor, Baylor, and Mosley. Again, that's Planning and Economic Development at 1 o'clock. Thank you.